Edition Golden Black Live. We never have the show on at the same time 2 weeks in a row, it seems like, but I know these guys.
We haven't all year, have we?
Yeah, I don't think so. Last week with Matt Painter, we had it at 12:30. That was great. Coach was great. We enjoyed that very much on the court of Mackey Arena. Do you have something you want to say?
I've just been sitting here all day waiting for the show to start, so I don't know,
I know,
when it starts. I got here first thing in the morning. I just took my seat and waited.
You just have to
I'm
wait.
new. You can blame me.
Yeah, you can wait. The earth will rotate, and this show will happen. So we're happy that you've joined us. I want to thank our sponsors, Triple X, On the Hill but on the Level, a Purdue tradition since 1929. Carrie and Greg Ersman, great friends of the show. And, of course, John Basham and Basham Reynolds, also a friend of the show. He'll be dialed into Purdue football tomorrow night, as will all of us. Hilton Garden Inn, or not on the Hill, but they are, when tomorrow's a big day, State HCI tonight. It'll be a happening place this weekend with the full house, I'm sure, this weekend for the hotel. And then, of course, State Farm agent Trent Johnson at trentismyagent.com. And, guys, Purdue, Ohio State, I think we were trying to figure out when the last time Purdue had a game of this consequence. I think Kyle may have asked it on the radio show today, but Brian, I'll let you, since you've been here a little bit longer. It's been a while since you've had a game of this importance, at least before the game starts.
Of this consequence or
Yeah.
of this anticipation?
I don't know. I mean, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure.
Because Michigan last year was
big, no
was
question.
big.
Yeah.
I mean, it was an afternoon game, so people weren't as excited about their pregame libations. And
Yeah, if they
might
do
be
that here.
in this case. But obviously, this is a showcase game for Purdue's program. This is one of those games where if you find a way to win it, it takes your program from one level to another. This is the very sort of high-profile moment.
Yeah.
Purdue's program could really use to accelerate its process, continue to build momentum, all that stuff. I keep going back to when Mike Babinski made the coaching change.
Right.
He made mention of something, high-profile national moments that Purdue just hasn't had one of to that point, that they just needed. They just needed that breakthrough moment, and this is another opportunity for tomorrow night. This is a nationally televised game, unbelievable environment, provided the weather doesn't scare everyone away, against an elite opponent.
Yeah.
with a Heisman Trophy candidate. It's all set up here for Purdue to have one of those sort of transformational, transcendent moments.
Yeah, and it gives you an opportunity to do that, Matt, in a game where you have, like I said, Brian said, a sellout, a great opponent, and Purdue trending in the right direction. I mean, certainly a game that, if you're Purdue, you look at this and say you played 4 really interesting games in a row, 3 wins, and that offense has been cranked up.
Yeah, and it's set up for Purdue to have big plays again. Ohio State is near the bottom in the country and giving up big plays this year. That defense has shown its teeth like it has in past years, and I personally think we're going to see a shootout on Saturday night. I think Ohio State has transformed itself into a pass-first team. Jeff Brom said it on Monday, as early as Monday, that he saw them on film and thought, "Wow, I know what that looks like." I mean, and I think it's going to be 2 entertaining offenses, and I think maybe the first 1 to 50 kind of wins in this kind of an environment, barring there's no 45-mile-an-hour gusts of wind, and that the weather kind of doesn't play as big a factor as we think it might. But I think we could see a shootout on Saturday, and I think that Purdue is set up to definitely give Ohio State's defense at least some damage.
Now, we had 4 guys walk into our studio that would just sit there and say, wind, that is a bunch of crap. They shouldn't care at all about weather. That shouldn't matter at all. This is football. It just matters with wimps like me that worry about the weather. Should it matter at all from your perspective?
Well, it's an interesting dynamic because when you look at what's kind of galvanized Purdue's offense, they've been really aggressive the last 3 games. The last time maybe they really weren't aggressive was Eastern Michigan. And whether that was Jeff Brom's coaching mentality in that sense and his trust level of David Blau, his confidence in him to throw the ball around like he wants to do, or that was the weather, we don't entirely know.
Yeah.
Now, I guess it sort of gets put to the test how much trust he has in David Blau to try to run the sort of offense Jeff Brom wants to run and to do it under adverse conditions.
Yeah.
To ducktail off that,
Yeah.
the head football coach, Jeff Brom, said on Thursday that he felt like the weather dictated too much of what Purdue did against Eastern Michigan in that game. And so if they're going to err, they're going to err on the side of being aggressive again. And if a big gust of wind is what holds Purdue back, I think Jeff Brown will be willing to take that as a result.
And I think that is what makes it very interesting. Is you have the sense that they're not going to sit back, and maybe that's changed over the last 3 or 4 weeks in terms of, Jeff Brom's talked a little bit about learning lessons, or at least trying to get his way worked into this season. We saw it in week 3 against Missouri in terms of very aggressive play, but now it's just, do you think that that's the fact that you're in game 7 now? Is that a natural progression in your view? Or do you feel like, that he may wish that he would have done things differently? And not that you're speaking for Jeff Brom, but just.
Well, I'm sure based on his tone, he certainly sounds like he wishes he'd done things differently. That being said, I don't know if you lost games. You can pinpoint very specific reasons you lost 3 games to start the season. They were penalties, they were turnovers. Now, you can obviously say, hey, if we'd scored more points, those things wouldn't have mattered.
Yeah.
Very true. But I think you've seen since Missouri a very different kind of mentality from them, and a mentality much more in line with what Jeff Brom wants to be, with what he is as a coach, with what he was last year when things were going well at least. And I just think that this game tomorrow night probably reflects whether or not the weather is something that he can kind of put out of mind and be what he wants to be. He certainly sounds like that's what he's going to do. One other point to make: the weather goes both ways.
Oh yeah, it does.
Yeah.
No question.
Ohio State makes big plays too. They have to throw the ball in the same conditions. Now, the last time the weather was bad, Eastern Michigan was the team that wasn't supposed to be dominant in the passing game, and they were. So. But I think that was largely a function of Purdue not having a pass rush. Purdue now recently has had a pass rush because it's batting about 750 on its blitzes here the last 4 games. If Purdue can't get pressure on Dwayne Haskins, it doesn't matter what the weather is. They're going to make big plays.
Boy, and they better bat that same percentage on their blitzes too again. And I feel like Nick Holt feels that way because they know there's still some deficiencies at end. But they feel like they can cover those up with blitzes by Cornell Jones, Marcus Bailey, Jacob Thieneman specifically have been excellent in what they're doing from the blitz standpoint. And I think when we talk about aggressive, we usually talk about offense. But I think when we look at it from both sides of the ball, I think Jeff Brom and Nick Holt had a conversation with each other and themselves by saying, if we're going to go down, well, let's just go down swinging. And I think that since the Missouri game, that's why I just don't believe this Missouri game against Drew Lock is a true reflection of what you're going to see from Purdue's defense against Ohio State, another prolific passing attack, because I just don't think Nick Holt's going to allow his defense to just rush 3 and drop 8 like they did sometimes against Missouri. I think that's completely been blown out of the water, and if they're going to lose, it's going to be because they got beat against a blitz of 5, 6, 7 rushers, and Dwayne Haskins just threw it over the top of them.
The difference now, reflecting the margin for error gap that comes with Ohio State versus what you've beaten the last 3 games. The last 2 games, Boston College obviously very good, although very limited offensively. The difference now is that when you blitz and that blitz gets beat, they hit a hot route or something over the middle. That's now a first-round pick catching that. That's not whoever Illinois
Well, I
has.
think Missouri had close to the same level, but not even to the level that we're seeing tomorrow night.
Yeah, I don't know if those were first-round picks catching those balls. They were good players, good college players, probably NFL guys to some extent. These guys are first-round picks.
And not at receiver. I mean, you're talking about 5 or 6 guys that are not only potential first-round picks, but you're talking about 4th-year and maybe even sometimes 5th-year players that are catching those passes from Haskins. He's allowed an opportunity to play with so much talent around him at the receiver position. I talked to a lot of people at Ohio State this week, and they think that it's the most talented and experienced group they've ever had at that receiver position, and they've had some good ones.
Yeah, they absolutely have. Now, we've talked about Ohio State's ability to has given up big plays. They keep the number 93 comes into play because they've given up 2 93-yard plays, which they feel like that's the end of the world over there, I guess. But do you see? I mean, you still see athletes. Even I know that Nick Bosa's not there anymore, and all this and that. They still have plenty.
They'll be okay.
They'll be okay. They have a top 5 NFL pick probably in the defensive line. This is a very athletic defense that I know they feel like they're underperforming. I don't know exactly how they get to that, but they do to some of the people over there. What do you see?
I'd like to know how many times opponents have tried to throw it deep against them.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've given up a lot of big plays, but when you have to do that to score on them, you have to try it a lot, and when you try it a lot, you're going to hit on more than the alternative. So they've given up big plays because that's basically opponents, I think, probably last recourse. I don't think Purdue's going to line up tomorrow and run the ball on Ohio State effectively. They're going to have to pass to set up the run. They're going to have some sort of balance. They don't have any balance, and they're just going to drop back and throw it deep every time. They're going to turn the ball over a bunch. They're going to give up sacks. They're going to go the wrong way more than they're going to go the right way. And that's just, they have to have balance. You can say that about every opponent they play. Purdue has to have offensive balance. They can't be a one-trick pony, or else it's not going to work.
So how do you run the ball on them? Because Purdue struggled against elite programs. I know we didn't do all the research on that, but against programs like Ohio State to run the ball consistently. DJ Knox has been terrific of late. Markel Jones has been more than serviceable. Still, can you run the ball on them? Enough.
The names are Kirk Barron, Dennis Edwards, Matt McCann, and Shane Evans. They have to be great in order for Purdue to be able to run the football. And in the last three wins, they've been great. They've allowed Purdue to establish a line of scrimmage. I talked to DJ Knox after the Nebraska game. He said, if we want to bully people, we have to be able to do this. And I don't know if they're going to be able to physically bully Ohio State, but they might be able to hit some shots, on draw plays. Jeff Brom can maybe scheme up some run plays to do that, but I also, to ducktail off a previous point, I agree with you in the sense that I think Jeff Brom would take the first two games and quite honestly take the first 4 quarters of David Blau's season and say, I didn't coach him correctly. Every time you ask him about David Blau's last 4-game stretch, which, Al, you detailed this week on Golden Black as one of the best 4-game stretches of any Purdue quarterback, he has said, the first thing Jeff Brom has said is that it's because I didn't coach him right, and we had to come up with a different plan. And the different plan was be more aggressive and not assume that David Blau is the check down king and that he's going to do all of the things except throw the ball vertically down the field. He has to be able to do that.
Now, Mark Herman, who will not argue the point, because Mark's about as big a supporter of Purdue quarterbacks and the lineage and legacy there, but Mark's right there in the picture in the numbers. They're all close. You can build a case.
Purdue's had some good ones.
Jim Everett might have been a little better than David Blau, maybe. Kyle Orton, we remember in 2004, 17 touchdowns, no interceptions in the first 4 games. Might have been his numbers later, but David Blau been extremely impressive.
Yeah, this is the best stretch of quarterback play we've seen since that stretch from Kyle Orton to start that season. That was almost flawless quarterback play. Flawless quarterback play. They got to open that year. Kyle Orton was very much
playing perfect games every game.
And
it was
very much for a third of the season, legitimately up
race
at the top of that list for that Heisman Trophy. Obviously, stuff happened after that, as tends to happen in that thin air of college football. But what David Blau is doing right now, I know Curtis Painter had some good stretches. I know Robert Marv had a good stretch here and there, but nothing compared to this.
And Elijah Sindelar, the last 4 games of last year was good too.
That too.
Yeah, it is. It's been, and I think the interesting thing too that has made Blau such a good story too is what the guy's been through. I mean, in over 5 years, he's had ups and downs. He's had injuries. He's had to deal with what we call the scorched earth of football, where they really weren't competitive. He threw for a lot of yards, threw a lot of interceptions. That I think is a big part of the attractiveness here. He could become a national story, as I think you said earlier this week.
You're talking about a guy that led the Big Ten in interceptions 2 years ago and has talked all off season long and all this season long about the big thing is David Blau's decision making has just been extraordinarily better. And it's been extraordinarily better in year 2 of a system under a former quarterback in Jeff Brom. And I think that marriage has been the best thing that's happened to Purdue in quite a while. And the reason I say that is just because, again, I think Jeff Brom assumed that there were certain things that David Blau couldn't do going into this year, like we all did. Yeah. Well, when we assume something, we make a what out of you and me, because and that's what's happened, is that Jeff Brom, going into the Missouri game, said, the heck with all this. I'm going to throw the ball vertically down the field with David Blau, and if we throw a whole bunch of interceptions, I can live with that. And it turns out 572 yards later, and a school record of passing yards later, he figured out, well, David Blau can do this. And then that narrative, which is blown out of the water, and quite honestly, on Saturday night, he's going to have to do something short of that again, I think, to keep Purdue in line for a possible upset.
Sports media is never wrong, right? No,
I think context matters here, too. I mean, obviously, as a sophomore, David Blau led the Big Ten interceptions, whatever it was. But when you're down 3 touchdowns right off the bat every week, and you have to throw your team back into it as a young quarterback with very limited help, around you personnel-wise, that stuff happens. Now, I think you have as good a coach as you could reasonably hope for in terms of putting a quarterback in positions to succeed. You have improved weapons around him. You have improved speed. You have a scheme that makes a lot of sense. We talk a lot about what we didn't think David Blau could do, even though he's often done that in his career. But we've never seen him under these circumstances in this position with this coach, with this supporting cast, with this game plan before. Now we are, and what he's been capable of in it has been pretty impressive. Same as it was very impressive at the end of last year for Elijah Sindelar after Anthony Mahangu turned into Calvin Johnson.
Which helped.
Which helped.
Which helped, yeah. All right, scenario for Purdue. If the perfect scenario for Purdue is obviously scoring more points than the opponent, but what has to happen early on for this to be a four-quarter struggle in the last possession type game? What would you paint as your perfect scenario for the Boilermakers?
Hit a deep ball, maybe 2 or 3. Get this crowd involved. Get an early lead. And give your defense an opportunity to be aggressive and allow Dwayne Hankins, for the first time, maybe since he was at since he was at Penn State, to start questioning himself. We've seen statistics.
Which he did a little in that game.
Exactly. Yeah. We've seen statistics where if he has a clean pocket, he's completing over 70% of his throws. If he's under pressure, that stat goes all the way down to about 42%. So if they can create some aggressiveness on defense, hit some big shots on offense, get an early lead, get the crowd involved into it in what I think is going to be an electric atmosphere, at that point you let momentum take its course, and then you never know what could happen.
Brian, anything else? I mean, in terms of from a scenario standpoint, what
Purdue has to tackle.
Yeah.
Because
space,
they're going to give up some big plays. What you can't let them do is not need big plays to just walk down the field. To do that, you have to get them down on first contact. When you have opportunities to move Haskins backwards, you got to do it. When he hits those little short routes off your blitzes, which he's going to, you have to tackle that guy and make a 10-yard, not let a 10-yard gain become a 50-yard gain, because the first-round picks they're throwing the ball to will do that like that. And Purdue will always be the physical inferior all across the field to Ohio State. Always. That is the reality. And those guys who are going to be carrying the ball, catching the ball, they're not easy to bring down. And Purdue just has to do the best job it can with it. Has to get a turnover, has to match Ohio State's big plays with a few of its own. If it can do those things, I think you have a chance for this to be a ball game at the end.
Yeah. Well, let's hope so. It should be an entertaining night of football. Now, as we'll go to segments 2 and 3 here after a short break, we'll talk to 4 guys that actually, in a very similar situation, figured out a way to do it. And that back in 1978, Purdue's 27-16 win over Ohio State. A great storyline. There was more to that team than just that game, but we'll bring on Bart Burrell and Pete Gwynn, Coach Jim Young and Mark Herman, not all at the same time. We'll separate them because they don't get along very well. But we'll look forward to doing that in our next segment of Gold and Black Live. Stay tuned.